Hello, welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds. Today, I would like to talk about magical artifacts, which is distinct to my mind from normal, everyday magical items. And if you're interested in magical items, you can check out my creation video over there. Okay, back to artifacts. So, what I'm going to discuss today is natural resources as artifacts, items of a bygone age as artifacts, and then I'm going to discuss truly unique items and how you can use them in your plot. My name is Marie Mullaney, and this is Just in Time Worlds. Let's get cracking. First, let's talk about artifacts that are natural resources. Probably the best example of an artifact that is a natural resource is the spice from Dune. Without the spice, there can be no space travel because the navigators can't fly. But the spice can only be mined on Arrakis, and there is thus extremely heavy competition for who controls the spice, who controls Arrakis. And that's the core of the first story, is that conflict between the two houses striving for control. This is a very natural outcome of artifacts as a natural resource, is that struggle to control where the artifact comes from. In order to create a natural resource artifact, you need to consider a few things that will alter the flavor of how the artifact works. First, you have to consider the origin of the resource. In the case of the spice from Frank Herbert's Dune, the only source is the planet Arrakis, and you need the sandworms, fungoid growth, as well as exposure to sun and air to create the finished product. This is an example of a naturally occurring artifact. The advantage of this is that you can have as much of it as you need given the right conditions. The downside is that unless there are things that cannot be replicated, people are going to wonder why it's a limited resource. Of course, you can have a naturally occurring ore instead of a biological item. This is the way that Steven Erikson handled Ototaro in the Malazan world. The advantage of an ore is that it could have been caused by circumstances in the dim past that can no longer be replicated, which ensures that it is a limited resource. Alternatively, you could stay with a biological resource, but make it a limited resource through other means. John Gwain's Shadow of the Gods does a great job with this. The world is a post-apocalyptic one in which the gods have died, and their corpses are the source for divine artifacts. People literally live in the skeletons of the gods in some cases, and they go scavenging for the bodies and items of the gods in others. If you go with this model, then you do need some pre-apocalypse history, and I'll discuss that in more detail in the next section. Speaking of which, let's talk about artifacts of a bygone age. The best example for artifacts of a bygone age is probably Warhammer 40k's Archaeotech, where there are items that come from the dark age of technology when mankind did unrestricted scientific research and created artificial intelligence and ended up in a war against the robots, which resulted in a post-apocalyptic fall. And that is what I want to emphasize thinking about here in terms of post-apocalyptic worlds and worlds that draw on this artifacts of a bygone age. There needs to be some kind of history about why these items were created in the first place and why the civilization that created them no longer exists. If you're going to use artifacts of a bygone age, either as resource-driven artifacts or as actual items, you need to have at least a rough idea of what happened in that bygone age. So let's talk about building a prehistory. There are two approaches that you can take. The first is that the ancient civilization had access to a different form of magic or technology. This, of course, raises the question of why doesn't the current civilization have access to it? Either this can now be forbidden magic or technology, that's how Warhammer 40k handles artificial intelligence, or perhaps the prehistory was a different race or species and the current civilization are living like scavengers on their technology or their magic. This is how it works in the Stargate universe where the Goa'uld scavenge the technology of the ancients. However, maybe it wasn't a different magic. Maybe the old civilization just fell and then the new one has not caught up with the previous power level. This has actually happened in our history multiple times. The Bronze Age civilization, as an example, fell due to the invasion of the Sea People. To this day, historians are not 100% certain who the Sea People were, but they caused the fall of the great civilizations of the Near East and Mediterranean Bronze Age. And that brings up an interesting point. You don't need all the history, just enough to be interesting and leave people with questions. We don't know everything about our history. Why would people in your world know everything about theirs? So those are your two broad approaches to building a prehistory that generates artifacts. Either a different technology or magic that people are scavenging from, or an actual fall of civilization and people are busy rebuilding one brick at a time. Generally speaking, this kind of artifacts of a bygone age shares the tray of being multiple artifacts with resources as artifacts. But what about that great staple of fantasy, singular or unique artifacts? Artifacts that are singular in nature are equally interesting. Artifacts that are singular in nature allow you to tell fascinating stories around finding them being stolen, creating them because they're so unique, and of course, famously destroying them. So I'm going to take each of those and discuss fantasy authors that have used these models really well. Let's first talk about finding the items. Jacqueline Carey has an amazing artifact that isn't an item. It is the name of the one god. And the name of the one god can be used to command his servants. The reason why this is important is because Phaedra, the main character, needs the name of God in order to free her childhood friend from an island where he is stuck by a curse. So Phaedra in the third book gets a clue as to where she can find the name of God. But in order to get the clue, she has to go rescue a boy. And that leads her into a place where she has to save the world from an oncoming onslaught. And it has, the whole quest is this incredible story that is just mind-blowingly well executed. Such a good story. If you have not read the Kashyyyl trilogy, seriously, just go read them. I cannot recommend this series enough. So your quest to find an item is a really interesting story mechanic because you can tell a lot of story around it, dribbling the information out slowly over time and letting people explore your world through it. It becomes a continuous story driver because you can drip the information and give people a constant reason to keep moving. Stealing an item has nearly the same effect, either if you're the thief or if you are hunting the thief. Famously, David Eddings did this in the Belgariad. The Orb of Alder was the initiating event that got the whole series started, the theft of the Orb of Alder. And the recovery of the Orb of Alder took 3 books. So you can see you can build quite a lot of story around finding and stealing and recovering of these items. But what about creating them? Creating an artifact should be hard. It should never be just a snap your fingers. It should be something that you have to go on a quest for. The most famous quest that I can think of currently is Thanos' quest to create the Infinity Gauntlet. Of course, what we see is somebody trying to prevent him creating the Infinity Gauntlet, but that doesn't change the epic nature of the quest. It consumes multiple movies where he has to get the Infinity Stones themselves. Then he has to get the item made by the dwarf. And then he has to actually put everything together. And he has to do it twice because of the time thing. It's a great story. It's also a great story from the other side of the heroes trying to stop him putting this artifact item together. So if you're going to have artifacts be created, make sure that you make it a complex, difficult job to create that artifact. And then let's talk about the big one. Destroying an artifact can be an amazing story, and it was told by J.R.R. Tolkien the best. In The Lord of the Rings, the quest to destroy the ring is the driving factor of the quest. That artifact comes from a bygone age. It affects its bearers. So you're always aware of what the ring is doing to Frodo, what it did to Bilbo, the effect that it has on people. And it becomes a character in the Fellowship. It's the Fellowship and the ring. You know about that artifact continuously. It almost has its own personality. It wants to get back to its master, and it will assist Frodo as long as he's carrying it in the right direction. The One Ring was an amazingly conceived artifact, and the quest to destroy it was an epically told tale. And that is my take on magical artifacts in fantasy, who's done them well, and what stories you can tell using them, and some basic guidelines for things to think about when creating an artifact. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode of Just in Time Worlds, and I will see you soon for another one.